Welcome everyone to the Mayor and Council work session of June 27th, 2022. I'm Mayor Kurt Wilson. I'd like to welcome my colleagues, Councilmember Christine Hall, Councilmember Mike Palermo, Councilmember Peter Vanstrom, Councilmember Lee Hills, Councilmember Will Morthland. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. I'd also like to acknowledge and appreciate that our city administrator, Randy Knighton, here is to my right. Thank you, Mr. Knighton, for being here. Our city attorney, David Davidson, joins us this evening as well. This is a rarity. Usually David pawns this off on the Mr. Petty. So we're very excited to have Mr. Davidson here. And of course, Marley Press, our city clerk. Thank you, Marley, for being with us. And unfortunately, I think Joe Panino is in the audience, but nonetheless, we will conduct a fabulous work session today. We are pleased to have two esteemed guests, David Cheatwood with First Tyron Advisors and Jim Woodward with Gray, Pennell and Woodward joining us tonight, and they'll be introduced by Ryan Luckett. And very excited to talk about, because this workshop is about a discussion of possible bond projects. And just as some background, the city of Roswell, since 1988, has passed a total of $98 million of bond projects, which, if you think about that over the past 34 years, is hard to believe. So tonight is an exciting night, I think, for this council and mayor and leadership of the city. And Ryan has been obviously working at great lengths to put some pieces together for us to have a great discussion. So Ryan, I turn it over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Mayor. As the Mayor mentioned, we're here to discuss potential bond projects. And before we get started, I wanted to just point out a couple things. Everyone should have a couple of handouts at their station. We've given you a copy of the presentation, but we've also provided a complete listing of the bond projects that have been submitted for consideration. And I will say that if the council's inclined tonight, we are able to, I can pull up the spreadsheet and we can kind of work through this live and see kind of where we land on numbers. If that's the desire of the council, we can do that. And I've also provided a memo from our bond counsel that just kind of outlines some of the basic steps in the bond referendum process. And so, as the mayor mentioned, we have two individuals here with us. David Cheatwood is from First Tyron Advisors. He's our financial advisor. And we have Jim Woodward, who is our bond counsel. And they're here to answer any questions that come up tonight. And before I start with the presentation, I'm just going to turn it over to them just to give you a very brief introduction and explanation of kind of what their role looks like in this overall process. I'll start with Jim.
Okay, great. Hey, Jim Woodward, law firm of Gray, Pennell & Woodward. We're a small boutique law firm. We're 7 bond lawyers. We're based here in Atlanta, Athens, and Savannah. And all we do is work with governments, cities, counties, school districts, all types of governments in connection with issuance of bonds or financing all types of projects. But basically my role is to draft the referendum resolution. We'll go through what that means today. Go through all the steps to get to the election, and then if approved at the election, basically go through all the steps to offer the bonds to the public. So I'm the lawyer for the transaction, draft all the documents.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to be back in front of you. As you'll remember, I was last here January, February timeframe, talking about revenues, expenditures, debt, credit, all those fun topics. And so I serve as the city's financial advisor. I've done so for the last several years. And in regards to the GEO referendum, my role has been and will be to advise Ryan on the potential financial impact and tax impact on different borrowing amounts, looking at the interest rate environment, the repayment term, the amount you borrow. And then if you move forward with a referendum, if that referendum passes, I would then shepherd you through along with Jim the issuance process itself, going out, getting credit ratings, and issuing the bonds in the public market.
Okay. Thank you, guys. So we'll get started with the presentation, and this is really just a very brief, high-level presentation to provide some initial information, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor, for whatever discussion that you want to move forward with. So as we get started, I just want to review this with you all. We talked about this several months ago, but over the next several years, these are the other opportunities that exist by state law that we have the opportunity to do a bond referendum. As you can see, in 2022, our only remaining time is this November. And for us to make the November 2022 election, the mayor and council would need to approve the bond referendum resolution prior to July 14th. And that date is significant because that's the next meeting date for the Fulton County Board of Elections. And they have a piece in this as well. The next couple of slides get into bond funding scenarios, and this is analysis that our financial advisor has gone through and put together for us. And so what we've done is basically broken this down by how this all equates to a millage rate. And so you can see here we're starting with $500,000 on the far left there, and you see project funds. That would be the amount of funding that's available to fund whatever projects you all decide on, as well as the cost of issuance, really there just for your information. And then across the top, you see the term, so 10, 15, 20, all the way to 30 years, and the projected or estimated interest rate based on what our financial advisor sees is happening in the market today. As I'm sure you all know, with everything that's going on, a lot of this is way up in the air, and by the time this would happen, if this all gets passed in November, the bonds probably wouldn't actually be issued till probably February, March timeframe at the earliest. So that's kind of the market we would be looking at in terms of rates at that point. But with $500,000, you can see the range of project funds goes from all the way from 24.6 to 46.5 million at 30 years. The next list is at $1 million. And at $1 million, 10 years is 49.5, all the way to 92 million at 30 years. At 1.25 mils, the project funds are 61 million for 10 years, all the way to 115 million at 30. And then 1.5 mils would bring in $74 million at the 10-year term and $137 million for 30 years. And like I said, we provided the estimated cost of issuance for each of those terms. We also wanted to show you kind of what this would translate to in terms of the property tax bill. And so what we've illustrated here is the average impact, or the impact for the average Roswell home, which is about $450,000 today. And so on an annual basis, you can see that currently with our current millage rate, we're at 4.718 mils. The total property tax bill for the Roswell portion is essentially $850. An additional $500,000 would increase that by $72. 1 mil is at $162. 1.25 mils is at $207, and then 1.5 mils would be at $252 annually. Other considerations, and there's a lot of considerations, but just some of the ones I wanted to highlight for the purposes of today, is that, as I mentioned before, if the referendum is approved by the voters in November, the actual issuance of the bonds take about 90 days from the actual election. The bonds can be issued in one or multiple issuances, and kind of one of the things that helped dictate that is how fast we were able to spend the bond proceeds. And so the city must have a reasonable expectation that it can spend 85% of the funds within a 3-year time period of the bond issuance, and that's kind of an IRS requirement. Other things we want to just keep in mind as you all make decisions, we want to do our best to match the term of the debt with the life of the asset. So, if we're building a fire station that's going to last for 40 or 50 years, we can do a 10-year term, but it also makes a lot more sense just in terms of best practice and in financial practices to try and match that term as best we can. So the max we can go out is 30 years. So I think it makes a lot of sense to consider some projects like that and making sure we're matching that to the life of the asset. We also want to take into account the impact on our annual operating budget. So any kind of new asset or expanded asset that we may be building may have operational impacts for utilities, personnel, just general operating costs. So we would want to take that into consideration. And the final thing I wanted to highlight was just other financing options. So a GO bond is not our only option. If there's something on this list that doesn't get funded with a GO bond, there are other options available, and we've had those discussions before, and we can definitely highlight some of those if there's any questions about that this evening. The last thing I wanted to mention, just to provide some context, is just some of what our neighboring cities have been doing the last few years in terms of bond financing. This slide kind of shows you the city of Alpharetta and the different financings they've had over the last 20 years or so. So most recently was this current year, $27 million for parks. You can see they did $50 million back in 2016, $29 million in 2012. The two at the bottom, those highlighted, those are financings that were accomplished through their development authority in conjunction with the city, and that included the Georgia State University campus, the Gwinnett Tech campus, and their conference center that is over at Avalon. So all of those were financings that were done in conjunction with their development authority. Johns Creek, they recently, in the past 6 or 8 years, did a parks bond referendum for $40 million. The city of Milton, they have a public facilities authority, and they've done 2 financings to fund their public safety complex, a courthouse, as well as some parks work. They've also had a GO bond referendum here in the past several years. And then finally, the city of Sandy Springs, their city center project, $160 million project, was also accomplished through a public facilities authority financing. So just wanted to provide some context there. That's really the bulk of the presentation. And I did want to show you real quick. So you all have a copy of this list in front of you. And as I mentioned, this is the complete listing. And if you're so inclined, we're able to update dollar amounts here so we can kind of keep track of what we're discussing. And we can give you a summary also by department of what is included in that. So with that, Mayor, that's the presentation, and we'll be glad to answer any questions that come up.
Ryan, thank you, sir. On the last handout here, page 1 or 2, it's showing a total of 213,708, 275. Do you want to add, I guess, for purposes of discussion, the potential 2 additional factors on here, or did you want to just leave that to a discussion between the workshop discussion here on between council and mayor?
The 2 additional factors.
2 additional, pieces that might be added to these set of requests?
Parking.
Yes, the parking and the bike and pedestrian master
Yes.
plan. Can you add that to here just for
Sure.
purposes of the discussion? Because I think, and then would you do the service of actually, if council will permit, would council like for Ryan to go through all these items, or would you like to skip that?
I'd like to have the bigger conversation first.
Okay? So then allow him to add these 2 items on, Mike. And by the way, you're looking incredibly well-rested and tanned. Yes, Councilmember Hills. Yes, ma'am.
I have just a clarification question, please. Thank you, Mayor. The other considerations in there, you're noting, Ryan, bonds can be issued in 1 or multiple issuances. I think I know what that means, but just for me, would you mind explaining that again, please?
Sure. So once the election happens, like I mentioned, it's about a 90-day time period for all of the pieces to fall into place with our financial advisor and bond counsel. And we have the option, so the bond referendum might have been $100 million, but we may decide that we're only going to issue $50 million of that the first year, and then come back the following year and issue the remaining $50 million. There's a variety of factors that fall into that, but one of the big ones is that we need to be prepared to be able to spend most of that funding within a 3-year time period. So that's going to dictate how many issuances really and how soon.
Thanks, Councilmember Hills. Thanks, Ryan. Well, it sounds like Councilmember Palermo, are you ready to roll? I can tell you're ready to go.
I am.
So, by the way, very nice haircut on Dr. Vanstrom's part. Glad to see you here with us. All right, Councilmember Palermo, the floor is yours, sir.
Excellent, thank you. So I appreciate it. So first of all, I do I do appreciate the discussion you just mentioned with the addition. I think it is important that if this mayor and council chooses to put out a bond referendum, I think it is important that we have a parking deck be one of our discussions. There's certainly the goal of expanding our walkable downtown, and there's certainly been a lot of interest from a number of different residents, whether they live close to Cannon Street and just want to see it being expanded, or for many residents that are not as close, that want to be really getting to use our great historic downtown, but of course having different parking challenges. And certainly there's certainly different viewpoints on that, but I'm always a fan of any time we can let really the voters being able to decide. And on that note, from a bigger picture standpoint, is that I think if this mayor and council considers this, I'd say for me, from my standpoint, I do definitely appreciate the fact that this mayor and council has the expectation of a millage rate that for the first year in many years would not be an increase to taxes. So although there's the of course, as so many of us saw, our assessments are way up, but the good news is with there is that new state law that had occurred, so it maximizes the increase, at least on the Roswell side of it. But with that, the fact that we are looking to reduce the millage rate and make sure that we are just keeping things even from that standpoint. So given that discussion that we had when going through the budget process, that makes me inclined to certainly want to hear from the public, and certainly give them the option to vote on really just investments, because I do think one of the things I heard a lot about last fall was obviously something that's been going on for many years, is Roswell's always been great at plans. Roswell's had many plans, and Roswell's not always great at executing those plans. And at the end of the day, it costs money to execute plans. And clearly with just our typical annual budget, there's not the budget for large capital investments on different things that we want, whether it's fully implementing a bike and ped master plan, which certainly potentially includes also filling in sidewalk gaps, and regarding, and there's certainly a portion of that we were able to fund with T-Splosh, but we still have a lot of sidewalk gaps that are not covered, and certainly a number of parts of the bike and ped master plan that are not covered. And another example is the River Park Master Plan. So the River Park Master Plan, I've really enjoyed in our public discussions that there is interest and support for ARPA funds going towards that to be a great environmental park that so many Roswell residents can take advantage on land that's not even being utilized today, although it's owned by taxpayers. But again, even with that, there's not enough money to do all of it. So I lean towards thinking that it does make sense to give residents and taxpayers the opportunity to decide, if they want to make some large investments and fund some of these things. I will say, certainly, this is a long list from staff. I'd say I certainly would want to see the list reduced, but also I'm certainly in the camp of preferring not a single large question that would cover everything, and instead looking at potentially breaking that up, whether it's 2 choices, 3 choices, 4 choices, whatever it might be. And the reason is, again, I want the voters to get to really just make sure that they're in charge. And if they want to support everything on there, then fantastic. If they want to support none of what's on there, they're fantastic. Or if they want to support some but not all, I am certainly in the boat of wanting to make sure that we're really focused on it's the taxpayers of Roswell that are really driving this question.
Thank you, Councilmember Palermo. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I believe we're doing resident input for this at 3 events coming up.
Point of clarification. Thanks, Christine, for bringing that up. So Friday and Saturday, this past Friday and Saturday, we began resident input at the concert series From the Earth Friday evening, and then Saturday at the Riverside Sound. And I apologize, I do not have any feedback from you tonight. And then on July the 4th at the City Celebration, We will be seeking input from all residents to come to our July 4th celebration. And those are three major events that we hoped would get a larger sampling of residents.
And just to follow up on that, will residents have the opportunity to see this list and also make recommendations or of things that they would like to see perhaps if they're not on this list?
So great question. It is my hope this evening, and not to prejudge it and be based upon the balance of what we all as a group decide to do. It was my hope this evening that we would go through this list. You probably heard me mention asking Ryan to add 2 items that weren't on the list, both the parking deck and the bike and pedestrian plan. It was unfortunate that nobody on staff would take on the parking deck. I asked Joe Panino, Jim Conroy, Dan Skowski, Jeff Leatherman, Sharon Izo, Darrell Conley, you name it. They all said, hey, I said, would you add the parking deck to your budget submittal? And they all ran from it. So we had to add it here at the last minute. And you can see the bike and the pedestrian plan is a little bit of a change. So in all seriousness, I have a hope, maybe I'll get to it, because I've actually gone through the list and I have suggestions from my perspective, and my assumption is each one of you probably does as well. And I was hoping that we might talk about that this evening. So I hope maybe we condense our suggestions, my hope, to the voters. And I hope that we'll have a healthy conversation about that tonight. Christine, you want to keep going? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
Okay.
I'm good, thank you.
Councilmember Mortland.
Since we are talking about adding the parking deck now, is there a possibility of going down the rabbit hole may not be the right word, but going in the direction of revenue bond as compared to general obligation bond for the parking lot? And what that would mean, good, bad, indifferent, that feedback.
And I'll let David kind of speak to this. I know he's done a lot of these, but you're definitely right that there's a lot of other options for financing this. It could be revenue bonds. It could be working through some of our partner agencies like the Development Authority, the Downtown Development Authority. There are other options to support that. I don't know if you want to add anything, David.
I'd add 2 things. I mean, as Ryan said, there's a couple of different ways to go to fund that. If you truly did something that was secured by just the parking revenues generated by the parking deck itself, that's a pretty tough credit to sell. But if you did it through one of your partner agencies and you had the backstop of the city behind it, and you maybe use parking revenues generated from that or other revenues, that's an option you could go, because you'd be using the good high credit quality rating of the city, the AAA rating, to get the lower interest rate. So there's a couple of different ways to go on that. It just depends on if the city wanted to stand behind it with its taxing power if it needed to do that to get a lower rate.
And I see 20 million, that's just our starting number.
Councilmember Mortland, thank you. And great points. Honestly, it was put on there as a negotiating chip because we knew Councilmember Palermo wanted the parking deck on there. So we figured we better get it on there if we're going to have a serious conversation about it tonight. So yes, discussion's wide open on it. And I love the fact that it could be a revenue bond as well. Councilmember Vinstrom?
Just talking about a parking deck, 20 million is not gonna pay for a parking deck, according to what,
Yes, sir. Thanks. No, absolutely. Anything in relation to all this you want to talk about?
can someone break down the difference between the bike and ped plan for 20 million and the sidewalk gaps and sidewalk?
Yes, I can do that.
2 million?
I can do that. But I didn't want to short circuit where I was going to go. I just wanted to show that there was a request in transportation of a number of, have you read through this? Had a chance to read through it? This 2-page list?
Yeah.
So you can see that there's $2 million requested by the transportation by Dan for the sidewalk gaps, sidewalk maintenance, $2 million. I was of the inclination from all of our time together since November that the bike and pedestrian plan was a priority for us, and that if I took all these other transportation projects, and there are, where's Dan? A lot of ways to get to them, but the thing that we needed to fund from our discussions in the past was bike and pedestrian master plan. So That $2 million is just saying, just make it 20, and call it the Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan. We can fill in the gaps more tightly if you want to. But that really is the last item under transportation was sidewalk gaps, sidewalk maintenance, ADA upgrades, funding to address sidewalk gaps, sidewalk maintenance, and new ADA transition plan. $2 million is submitted by Dan. That was my suggestion. Just take it to $20 million and make it the Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan. Councilmember Palermo.
Well, I would
Oh, yes, sir.
follow up. Let's go back to the bonding for a parking deck and discuss that a little further, because Councilman, Mortham it's a perfect question that we really need to bat around, is does it need to be a part of this, or do we utilize our Downtown Development Authority for the location where that deck would be? It would be the Downtown Development Authority. Maybe a little more understanding of the benefit of putting it in a general or putting it and working with our development authority, and how financially, it's just to me, it's just a AAA rating that we're utilizing, and we're backing them on that. Otherwise, it's all funded through them and doesn't have to be a part of this.
Unfortunately, downtown development authorities and development authorities only have the power to do economic development projects. So they can issue bonds, kind of like, was it Milton? That had, like for private schools or private universities or foundations, or hospitals, they can do projects like that, or they can do tax incentive transactions. But their charge is to promote economic development. And, there's a case out there, a state Supreme Court case called Odom case, that says they can't do governmental projects. So that they don't have the authority to do that. Their charge is really your economic development side. But for authorities, what some cities have done is create something called a Public Facilities Authority. This is what Sandy Springs, we did in Sandy Springs and a few other cities. That's a local act. So during the General Assembly, you can create this local act authority with certain unique powers. It could be, for all governmental projects, or sometimes we say they're just for fire projects or airport projects or unique projects. But that would need to be dropped in the hopper, at the beginning of the session in January. And that'd be, if y'all decide to go that route, it'd be effective as of June 30th. And so that'd be a next year deal. But that authority has the power, if you give it the power to do any or all these projects, it'd be your conduit issuer. And they'd issue the revenue bonds, and they'd be secured by an intergovernmental contract with the city, where basically the city would agree to pay debt service on those bonds. And so it'd be a full faith and credit, make those contractual obligations, so very similar credit to what your GEO bond is. But you just have to have that authority created that has the powers to do it on the other side. And so that'd be a next year process.
Thank you. That was going to be my next question, so thanks for getting ahead on defining that for us. I've, in researching development authorities, been seeing a lot of gray. And if you're defining economic development, a parking facility accommodates economic development because you're going to be making it accessible to a large increase in the number of customers who could be coming in and utilizing services in the downtown central district area. So is that a little too gray?
There's been one done I worked on in Atlanta and one in Athens. They didn't use their DDAs. It's not as straightforward as what a PFA could do. You have to put some restrictions on it. It has to be, has some private management and some other things. And so it's not quite as clean as just running a public parking deck, or especially one that's just open at all times. There'll be meters and things like that involved. And so it's not a traditional governmental parking deck. Is how those are structured. But that's an option. It'd be more fares, and there's different legal issues in there. We'll get to it.
Can I offer up something, and just for thoughts and process, because I think depending upon if you want it as a revenue bond or underneath this bond worthy discussion, I'm going to offer up something and expect a lot of challenge and pushback to this. But I just want to suggest to you, when I went through this list with Ryan earlier, because Ryan submitted $213 million, and you saw the two additions there. And this is just my perspective, and obviously this is where I'd like to suggest some conversation, because I think I would like for us as a body to make decisions, to condense about what it is we want to do and what we don't want to do. So, for example, on the very first four items, under the total river park investment of $24,700,000, as requested by Jeff, I put a check by all four of those. I said that that $24,700,000 should be submitted for a bond to the voters underneath the River Parks Master Plan, Total River Parks Investment. And if you'll go through the rest of the page there, you'll see another $65,800,000 in addition. East Roswell Park, Seven Branches Park, Groveway Community Park, Woodstock Soccer Complex, Henry Park, Roswell Area Park, Lita Thompson, Heart of Roswell, Oxbow Trail Connectivity, Sweet Apple Park, Grimes Bridge Park, etc., all the way down. All that totals for submission of bond projects for Parks and Recs in addition of $65,800,000. I went through and basically extensively said two things I took out. I took out $5 million of the $20 million requested for the Roswell Area Park, and I took out the $1.2 million for historic homes. So I ended up ostensibly with $60 million on Parks and Rec under that part of the bid budget, and 24/7 are on the River Park investments. So call it $85 million as submitted by Jeff for Parks and Rec. On the EPW suggestions by Sharon, she made 7 requests for a total of $21,250,000. I said 0 to all of those and have a plan that we're happy to talk about separate than this, but would not put those underneath the request for this current bond. Under the fire station request for $29,063,275 million, I'll give you very specifics. On Fire Station 21 replacement, the request was for $6,881,000. I put $3.6 million would be go towards this in the bond. On the Fire Station 22 replacement of $6.9 million, I concur with that $6.9 million. On Fire Station 23 replacement of the $4.5 million, I concur with that $4.5 million. On the relocation of Fire Station 27, a request for $5.3, I put 0. On the construction of new Fire Station 28, request of $5.3, I put 0, for a total of $15 million going towards fire projects of the $29 million requested. On police, you'll see that there is $35,645,000 requested. I made this really simple. I put a $25 million of that $35 million would go towards the bond, and basically it's $20 million for the new public safety facility headquarters, along with $5 million for the 911 emergency communications. So concur with $25 million of the $35 million I'm in alignment with there. On transportation, I basically put 0 on every project that Dan requested, all the way down to the last project we just talked about, the aforementioned sidewalk gaps, sidewalk maintenance. Dan asked for $2 million. I put in $20 million in there, but really $20 million as part of as the bike and pedestrian master plan. And then the one thing that's not, as you can see, that's not part of the $213 million requested, $213,708,000 requested by staff, is the parking deck. And that was a last minute addition. And Peter, you're exactly right about the number, but we put $20 million in there to get it in, to get the conversation going as part of this bond. So basically the request that I have to put in front of you for discussion, just me, Parks $85 million, Fire $15 million, Police $25 million, Transportation, which is really the bike and pedestrian plan, $20 million, and Parking deck $20 million, for a total of $165 million. So I thought, I don't know if that's helpful in terms of the discussion, but wanted to maybe give some, clarity there. And I realize there may be a completely different perspective on any and all items, but just thought I'd throw that out there. And since it's 5:40, I know we got a short amount of time to talk. So, yes, sir. Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you for doing that and helping, make the discussion productive. So, couple responses that I have is, first off, from a transportation standpoint, you mentioned the one thing being $20 million towards the bike ped master plan. What I definitely like the idea of combining But for me, I think it would be, so if 20 million is the number, that it just be $20 million and it going towards, it either needing to go towards either bike ped master plan or sidewalk gaps that are within our current sidewalk matrix. And so not needing to split those exact hairs this moment, but just being very clear to the voters that if we choose to put it on there, that if 20 million is the number, here are the two potential things that $20 million would go for. So that's how I'd see that one. A concern I have, and I know, I'm sure the chief had looked into this, so I'm sure there's probably some good data on it. But this weekend, actually, a conversation I had was with someone that had just built a public safety campus headquarters, I forget what it was, and I want to say he said it was about $30 million, and that was not including the cost of property. And he said on the one they did it on 2 acres. But so I guess just that's where my concern is on the how much confidence there is around $20 million. So that's something. Another response I'm not going to get into this moment because there's obviously a lot on there. Just as you had, I think, removed some park and rec things from 2 items, there's probably a few more that I'd be really questioning if those are really priorities. And then my final statement at this moment to make is I certainly, obviously we have to be realistic for the voters, and we can't give 10 different line items to vote on. But I do strongly believe that we should look at and consider having even some different groups, because I don't want voters to feel we're putting it all together into a big number. Whereas then I'll tell you, I certainly can be comfortable with the number that you shared, but I'm more comfortable with it knowing that it's broken up and it's not an all or none type choice.
Thanks, Mike. Do you want to, it might be helpful if you want to go ahead and talk about some of the Parks and Rec projects that you might want to remove from the consideration.
So one of them, I'm really questioning just the $350,000 towards Heart of Roswell Park. So I absolutely love Heart of Roswell Park. It's a great, small area to bring the community together. And at the same time, I'd say at a lot of different festivals, whether it was the most recent Roswell Moves after the mayor's bike ride, or during Alive in Roswell, during other different festivals, that it is a great area bringing the community together. So I guess I'd want to understand how $350,000 makes it that much more successful in bringing the community together and having kids and adults, enjoying their time there. That was one. And then some of the other ones, and I'm actually really focused a little more on the small ones. The small ones, I lean towards thinking those should be things that we should be able to fit in an annual budget.
Fair enough.
So when I see $130,000 $215,000, maybe even potentially $780,000. It's just I want to make sure that if we do decide to ask the voters if they want to go for a bond, that we're really doing it in things that we have a strong confidence we would not be able to fund otherwise. That's my initial reaction.
I think that's a really good point, Mike. I think that's a fair observation. It's almost like if it's not, and don't mean to sound trifle, but if it's not $1 million or $2 million, then don't put it into the bond. You need to figure out how to get it done, right?
Right.
Or it's not that important to get done.
Yep.
So I think that's a fair submission, just for a standpoint of, I'd say anything here below, let's say $1.2 million, just remove it from the request. Is that a fair assumption?
I think it is, because for me, again, my thought process is there's the part of me that would just love to say, you know what, let's not even discuss a bond. Let's make sure, of course, we're gonna keep our millage rate low, and we're not gonna need to ask for a bond. But at the end of the day, it comes down to there's a lot of things on here that I've heard a lot of residents really want, and there's really no way to pay for them. So that's why that's what gives
Help
me
me with the math.
the opportunity to want to see if taxpayers do want to pay for it or not.
So I think you took about maybe $3.5 million out of there, approximately out of the equation, which is great. Anything else you want to kind of look at, or possibly address? And if that's, is that the right number, kind of that 1.2 million number, or, yes, sir, Councilmember Hall, yes, ma'am.
I just have a question, and this question's for Jeff. These park numbers, 20 million, 10.2 million for Hembry, the soccer complex, 3 million. Can you explain if they can be compartmentalized? So the 20 million is replacing everything at Roswell Area Park, or what is that doing?
Yeah, probably Roswell Area Park is, I would say, the most complicated out of, meaning that it's got the longest list behind that $20 million, which is why the number is so large. But you've got a combination in that park in particular of ball fields, football fields, soccer fields, replacement, a number of sidewalk replacements, and restrooms and picnic shelters. And that's all kind of built into that number. The other piece is the conversation around the future of the existing swimming pool, and where do we head with that, and that is also a component of that number, about $5 million or so associated with the detail behind that. We do have a more detailed line item associated with that 20 million. Be happy to go through it with council, even on a one-on-one basis. It makes this conversation a lot more complicated when you really start to get into the 20 or 30 line items associated with that budget build out.
And my question is, it seems like everything aged out at the same time with these big dollars. And do they all need you wouldn't ask for it if they didn't all need it, but every one of our parks is getting everything done.
Not everything, no. There are a number of existing project improvements, and I'll use Sand as a great example down on the river along with East Roswell. There is $2.5 million at East Roswell that is investment that is part of this year's budget. So we pulled that information out of our projections, making the assumption, which you all did, of approving that in your budget process. And so these are forecasted over the next couple of years. And I think as Ryan described, the bond issuance can go over a couple-year cycle. And so we're not looking at just year one, what do we need to do? We're looking at 2 and 3 and 4 as these bond projects would roll out, what's coming kind of on the immediate need, but then what's right on the back door of that, so that we have those contemplated in about a 3-year cycle of really what we see that's coming that needs to be replaced in that short-term and medium-term investment in those facilities.
Can you ask, sorry, Peter, can you, just to echo that, can you let everybody know, just on recreation and parks and cultural and historic affairs,
Right.
how much deferred maintenance has occurred in the last 10 years? And it's relatable, and I'll relay that point, but how much have we deferred maintenance?
So right now we're projecting about $75 million of maintenance needs outside of our indoor facilities. So that's just our park facilities. That is not our community centers and recreation centers. And that looks out over a horizon as we currently sit right now. That looks at a horizon over the next about 5 to 7 years that we know are items that are coming. And we also have existing facilities that will continue to age in place that will require an investment. The other just side note that I wanted to make, Mayor, on your 1.2 threshold that you and Councilmember Palermo were talking about it, Big Creek Trail Repairs sits in at $1 million, and we definitely have been investing in the trail repairs and the boardwalk repairs over the last probably 2 budget cycles. And I would just advocate for that project, at least in your consideration. There's that $1 million line item there, and a big portion of that is boardwalk and bridge repairs in that park location associated with our multi-use trail, as just a point of clarity and discussion.
Which park?
Big Creek Park.
Councilmember Vanstrom, yes, sir.
Yeah, as long as we have you sitting here, and thanks for all this hard work. We do have according to Ryan, a time frame of if the money comes out, it's got to be spent. And we also have an option on bonds for different years that we can have for terms, 10, 20, 30. So I'd like to at least have a discussion of what is what could you do with 60 million? And what if we termed it out at 20 or 10 and then cycled again and gave you more that you could utilize for our parks? We had a plan that to say within X number of years, we have the best parks in the world. And I just kind of want to throw that out for discussion, because if this is going to be a single item, as Councilman Palermo has been talking about, is trying to put each of these out for the public's discussion and vote. Do we need the whole enchilada, and can we handle the whole enchilada and have it all done in 3 years? And is it one of those that we should be looking at maybe a shorter term and splitting up? So I just want to put that out for discussion.
No, I think that in terms of a spending plan, it's 3 years from each issuance. And so, if we did one issuance, say in 2023, and then waited 2 years and did another issuance, it would kind of space that out a little bit. I don't know, Jim, if you have anything to add. I mean, is that?
You can approve a not to exceed amount, so $100 million or $50 million, that's the cap. You're not forced to issue that amount. That's just the max amount. And you're not, you don't have to issue it all at the exact same time. And so you say you approve 100 million, you do 50 million next year, and spend that money in 3 years. Maybe 2 or 3 years from now, you issue the remainder of the 50 million. And so that way you'll have different tranches, but it's all approved at this one time. So even though you approve it all now, you can do half of it, all of it now, or space it out, or you don't have to do any of it now. It's just your authorization to do up to not to exceed amount. So you can space it out. So that the alternative would be to do part of it now and come back for another referendum maybe next year or 2 years from now. But you'd have to get that approval at that time. If you have a master plan, you want to get all these projects approved now, you can do them all together now, get them all approved, and then space it out over the next 5 or 10 years.
One thing I might add too is just that I'm not sure if you're alluding to this, but just to clarify that, doing a bond referendum and say it's 20 or 25 years, it doesn't mean that we can't do another bond referendum until that 25 years passes. A lot of things change, a lot of things happen. We're a growing city, the digest grows, there's increased capacity to take on debt, and there's ways of structuring it so that you're able to do another bond referendum in the future. And that's exactly kind of what some of our neighboring cities have done to take advantage of that. So I just want to make sure that was out there too.
Councilmember Mortler.
Yeah, the only note that I had, and Jeff hit on it right there, is the bottom line, $1 million. I'd like to stand and ask that we do the $1 million Big Creek Park piece as compared to having a 1.2 threshold. That $1 million is going to go a very long way with Big Creek Park with all the items that we've talked about. And the big piggy bank here with the Roswell Area Park, that's a giant piece that this money can go a long way. $15 million there is going to turn that into a shining star in the middle of our city. So I look forward to that. But my only add here is that we do cap this at $1 million, not the 1.2, so we can get that Big Creek Park back in.
Brian, would you make that change just for the math formulas for us here? Councilmember Hills.
Thank you. How does that work? So let's say this goes forward, gets voted in, as it is in this moment. If we come in under on a Sweet Apple Park and over in another, how does that work within the park segment, whether we vote on it by itself or as a portion of one bond vote? How does that work? Is there flexibility within there?
Please feel free to correct me, but my understanding is that with the way the referendum is structured, the voters would essentially be approving money for a category of projects.
Yes.
And after, if you all were to approve the bond resolution, there would be a period of time where the council and the city would be educating the public on what projects are included in that. But if, when construction happened, if we went over or under, those funds have the flexibility to be utilized for the other approved purposes. Anything you all want to add to that?
I was going to say, yeah, you're not saying we're doing $1 million for Big Creek Park in the referendum language itself. You're saying that we're doing $20 million for this park project, and you can allocate.
So for purposes of things, that's why you probably heard my beginning salvo. I said, forgive me, $85 million for parks, 60 million for parks, 24,870,000 for the river master plan, call it 85 million, 15 million for fire, 25 million for police, 20 million for the parking deck, and 20 million for transportation of the bike and pedestrian master plan. So that's why I was selling it like, and then for the purposes of us, kind of having understanding, how do we get to the numbers and do they work and do we agree, and for submittal to our fellow residents. But if the way I understand it, the clarity of it is exactly you're saying, we're asking for a revenue bond, for a bond for parks for $60 million. We're asking for a bond for the river master plan for 24 million, call it 25 million, just make this simple right now. We're asking for a bond for fire for 15 million, for police for 25 million, for transportation, or the bike and pedestrian master plan for 20 million. And that's what I kind of wanted to frame, like keep it big, and then us go down and say, do you want to spend this money on this, or do you want to submit spending this money on this? For we have clarity on that. Those projects are something that we understand we're going to move forward on for submission to our fellow residents. But getting to that place and having an understanding, like, is it 60 million? Is it 80 million? Is it 100 million? Is it 120? Is it 140? And why is it? And what is the length? Is it a 10-year term, 20-year term, 30-year term? So, but part of that, first of all, I thought was like getting to the, what are the categories and how much money? Do we think it makes sense at this time? You know, and I would kind of say, that's why first my beginning salvo is a reminder to us. This city has approved $98 million of bonds since 1988. We're here together on June 27th, 2022. And I think that responsibility is gigantic. And I think that responsibility, that's why I mentioned $75 million of deferred maintenance. So think about that. It's really up to us to submit to our fellow residents. And I think there's an appetite among our fellow residents. They understand, I think, that the city has not invested the way they would have liked in the things that we want as fellow residents. And I think our fellow residents understand that this is a bond that they'll approve or not approve. It's up to them. It's our job to give them, hey, go big, go big, go big. It's time for this city to go big. I personally am excited about submitting $65 to $60 million of parks projects. I'm excited about submitting $25 million to complete the River Master Plan as originally envisioned. I think that's so cool. I'm excited about $15 million for 3 fire stations. I'm excited, but to Mike's earlier part, about $25 million for a new public safety building with a new 911 center. I'm excited about actually maybe fulfilling the dream of the bike and pedestrian master plan. I'm excited about putting a parking deck and facilitating that and solving that solution. And I think our fellow residents are excited about this too. And I think you guys have been very clear about let's make it really meet, have value, and everybody says, man, that's what I want too. Councilmember Palermo.
And the great thing about a bond is we get to absolutely confirm if they're excited about it or not.
That's right.
They get to all one by one tell us, which is great, which truly is, I think, a positive thing. So actually, a question I have is I've been jotting down some notes. Remind me, how much? What's the total number to parks that gets you that you'd be excited for us to get to improvements for?
I think I've got an update because we cut using the $1 million threshold. And by the way, Jeff, forgive me. Remember, I took 20 to 15 on the Roswell Park. So I took 5 out. In my mind, I know what that 5 is, but you and council and all of us may come to a different conclusion of where that 5 comes from. So taking that 5 out, taking the 1.2 for the historic asset piece, and then all the things below $1 million, what are we down to?
So with the 85 million that you originally mentioned, and then if you take out everything less than 1.2 except for the Big Creek Park, that's roughly 83 million.
All right, so 65.8, sorry. Do start with the 65.8, Les, because the 24/7 is the River Park investment. That's a separate piece, right?
Yes.
And 24/7 is River Park investment. Then you got 65.8 less the 1.2 for historic homes, the 5 million for the Roswell Area Park, the 350 for the Heart of Roswell Park, the 780 for the Lita Thompson, the 225 for the Sweet Apple, and the 130 for Town Square, 215 for Sloan Street Park. Did I say that all correctly? I think that gets you.
I'm gonna,
You want me to do it real quick? I know, I hate to be the finance guy. We're the finance guy in the room.
Mayor, I still have more comments, so I want to make sure.
I'm sorry,
No, no,
Councilmember Palermo.
No,
forgive
don't be
me.
sorry, because I actually want to hear this first. I just want to make sure Ryan's not eating up my time.
Nobody can ever eat up your time, Michael. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Exactly.
No.
Chief Conroy, I know that if you get a chance, come on over here, because I know we're going to want to talk to you about that $20 million and the $5 million on the, I know that's going to come up. Please, sir.
that's 57.9.
57.9, thank you. So
So 57.9 for the
24/7.
below, and then 24.7 for the river master plan?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So that's helpful. And then, my two remaining comments are, one, although as discussed, I certainly strongly believe that it should not be one question, there should be multiple. I do have concerns with too many questions also, so I do think something this mayor and council should consider is potentially combining some things, but although not combining all. And then lastly, knowing what we heard at the beginning, or actually, I don't know if you spelled it out, but it's in this document, right here, this memorandum.
Yes, sir.
It basically says that if the mayor and council wants to get this on the November election, then it would need to be done by July 14th. And we have a regularly scheduled mayor and council meeting on July 11th. So if that is the interest, and knowing that we've got multiple public discussions that will be had as well at the three public events mentioned, all prior to that July 11th. What I'd encourage this mayor and council to do would be one of two things. Would be either, because I do think that if this mayor and council wants to move forward with this, I think it is important that we have more than one vote on it. And so what I'd encourage is either we make a last minute addition to tomorrow's committee meeting. Doesn't mean all these exact details should be spelled out, because again, I really want to hear what people have to say at those multiple events, including ending at July 4th. And that could certainly adjust my viewpoint on July 11th. But I do think at least a big picture is either voted on either as a last minute addition for committee tomorrow, or as a special called meeting on an evening. So, maybe finding some evening where there's a 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. meeting, probably 7, just being good for people that do want to show up and getting out of work, to vote on this, to really just making sure that we're granting enough opportunity for public comment, in addition to those public events you've mentioned, which are really us going to the people, which I think is great, but just good opportunity for multiple votes, multiple public comment sessions, et cetera.
Mike, thank you. I think great suggestion. And of course, the beauty of a bond going on a referendum is that the people ultimately make the decision. And that's the beauty of this, right? It is a bond put before the people to make a decision about it in and of itself. But great points, and to your point, any and all feedback we get into it, we all know as elected leaders and as residents, the amount, I think Christine mentioned it at the very beginning, and we went through this exercise in Greenville, where we pulled out the 120 excess plans that the city had made. As Peter said during his campaign, we are Plansville, and that there was 120 plans made between 2010 and 2021 at a conservative cost of over $5 million, of which those plans, nearly none had had any implementation to little. We all know this. It's not a surprise to any of us been around. We all know about our aspirations, hopes, and dreams for this city. And I think this is a part of that. And I think the vast majority of people feel the same way. But as you said, Mike, they'll ultimately make that decision come November if we move forward as a council to do this. So, yes, sir. Councilmember Hills, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Mike, Councilmember Palermo, thank you for noting that about the lesser, which is not small money, but the lesser valued items here, pulling those off for now. I liken my thought process to this when you paint the hall bathroom and it looks so great, and then you step out into the hall and realize that the next two rooms have to be taken care of. These big ticket items are exactly why people move here to Roswell and why people stay here in Roswell. And we haven't been taking care of our hall bathroom or the rest of the rooms, and it's time to do that. I absolutely think that there'll be time and space in our next budget cycle. I'm already thinking about it, which I'm not the budget girl, but I'm working on it. I think that there's time and space in there to take care of these smaller areas, and I think some of those could have some outside funding for them. I know at least one or two, and some interest in those where community members have already spoken up and reached out to mayor and council about those. So I feel like those will get accomplished by default, if not by the force of the will of the people. So I agree with that, and I applaud that. There was something else I was going to say there, but I agree with that. I also want to back you up and say that I definitely think that we should move this to another work session, maybe tomorrow night. I would say not maybe a special called meeting, because I believe we all need to be here, and it's open season for vacation. I think that's going to be tough for all of this mayor and council to be together again by the 11th. So I'm just throwing that out as an opinion that I would say that's a great idea for tomorrow night to add that.
Get it on committee for tomorrow night.
I would, yes, I support that. I'm not putting the Hail Mary on it, but I support that and my reason why. Thank you.
Councilmember Vanstrom.
Yeah, thanks. We've got another at least 20 good minutes, or maybe more, that we can still hammer a few things out. And I'd like to maybe get this to the point tonight where we have our buckets. Can we get to that point where you alluded, Councilman Palermo, that you're thinking some of these could be combined, some of them maybe not, and I think this is the approach we just took to parks. We could probably take to the next line through line items, and we can decide maybe how we could combine buckets or not combine buckets. And as far as combining buckets, the first bucket that I'd like to suggest, I think parks are parks, and I think Parks and Rec goes under Parks and Rec. Or, sorry, if we're not changed that officially, Rex and Park. So I would like to see that as one bucket. And I'd like to see what our total ask would be of our community, and let them make the decision on parks as a single entity. And then I'd like to discuss those other items as we go through. I know we've got the chief sitting here right now, ready to talk a little bit more specifically about the police needs. Maybe we could review the fire needs again a little bit, decide those as public safety, one bucket or two, and see if we can make progress on that. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I think, Peter, thank you. Chief, will you weigh in on this 25 million? I know we've changed it up on you a little bit. 20 million for your, and Mike brought up the brig at some point, like, hey, one of our sister cities to the south of us, just did a new public center. It cost $30 million. How are we gonna pull it off for 20 million?
So I think if you remember my presentation at the bonds meeting, I echoed some of those same concerns. The department in question, they did have some cost overrun. Their original projection was 20 million to include the purchase of the property. I know they ran into several issues. One, I think they added a municipal court to that project. It was included in the initial scope, and they ran into some challenges with blasting that was required for granite that they ran into for construction, which hopefully we're not going to have that issue here. And I don't know that we necessarily would want to demo and build from the ground up. That 20 million was conservative, but also was with the assumption that any proceeds from the sale of our current facility would also be added in to help offset those costs. So that's one concern, or one benefit. If you combine the 911 centers, we've talked about the 911 communication center for a number of years here. There's an efficiency of providing those on the same property, and we're hoping to find a property where we can combine them and have this all in one location that would provide some efficiencies in that regard. So those are the beliefs of the proceeds from the sale of our facility, that 20 million plus the 5 million for 911, plus we also have another million.
I'm sorry, talking to Dan behind you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thought you wanted me to repeat that.
No, yeah.
Plus, there's another million that the city received from special project funding at the behest of Lucy McBath's office from Congress.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Chief. And with that, I definitely appreciate the conservative thought process, but this is where the last thing I'd want to do is underestimate. And one thing I'm very confident of is I feel our voters are certainly not forgiving. If we're going to say something costs 20 million, it really ends up costing 25 million. And so I think I heard this earlier. So let's just pretend the number ended up being 30 million. We go to the voters and ask $30 million for a new public safety complex, and Chief's able to help us out with some strategy. It only costs us 25 million. What's done with that extra 5 million of cost savings if this was an item that was only public safety?
Right, so, two things, you can resize it once we issue the bonds. So, we'll tailor, we'll have the, project description, everything else, it may have some bids in for the construction costs. So we try to tailor that amount. We won't go out with 30 million, we'll tailor it to what is needed at that time. But say you do go out and issue the full $30 million and it comes in a lot less, the extra bond proceeds go into a sinking fund and are used to pay down the debt service, until it's done. And so you gotta spend that money down quickly. But once your construction fund or the projects are done, you have a completion certificate and you just drop that money in the sinking fund.
Okay, that's helpful. And then now for the inverse of that happening, the city goes for 25 million and it gets approved. And then we find out it ends up costing 30 million. Now we're short 5 million. That's just where we have to just find a way to come up with an additional 5 million because voters only authorized for up to 25 million for it, right?
Yeah, that's your cap. There's some premium bonds and things like that you can play around with. That's the par amount of the bonds. You get premium, which you sell a higher interest rate to get a little more money, but that only gets you so far. So there's some things that David can help out with in structuring that. But that's it, yeah. And you can not do the bonds. You're not obligated to do the bonds. And so say it goes way over and the project's not feasible anymore, you just don't issue the bonds. Or if you do issue the bonds and it goes over.
Interesting.
Yeah, you just come out of general fund, whatever.
Oh, okay.
Or you can do another bond deal down the road, vote another GO bond. Of course, it's time, we'll see what we can about.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Palermo. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. Just to follow up on the first part of that question where 30 million is issued and by some chance it's 20 million. So the 10 million, do we have an option to do other police
Yeah,
and
that's right.
or safety?
Right, we'll keep it a generic ballot question, and so you don't have to say it's going to be a police station on this corner. We try to avoid that. The law just says, you have to describe the project sufficiently so police and will come up with names for it. Like road, streets, and bridges is a good term for all the roads, streets, and bridges in town. And so say the original project you thought of are done, and you have $5 million left over, you can always find some more roads, streets, and bridges to spend the money on. And so that's the first thing. What else can we use this for? Other police stations or anything else police related? That's the bond. That's what's authorized in that bond.
So we're able to do that in
Yeah,
the language.
yeah.
I mean, the intent is the
Right.
station, but
Right.
should there be funds left over and they need,
Right. We'll keep it.
equipment for the,
Police cars, everything else. We'll keep it generic enough question. That's everything related to police force type assets, capital assets. But so that's it. So you use that money first for any projects, but for whatever reason there's nothing left, then you have the option of just paying out your debt service. But yeah, most times there's a catch-all. And if you combine all your projects together in one question, and you have excess of your costs of your police projects go higher, you can pull from your parks and recreation. So you're not locked within these buckets.
Or flexibility.
If you do it in a global question, if you do it, siloed each question, each bond is a separate purpose. That's all that bond can be used for. And so you can kind of go back and forth between the projects. You can't,
I want to submit to my colleagues, by the way, that when I gave my little suggestions, I was submitting it as a one bucket approach and not a several bucket approach. If you asked me if I were to submit it as a several bucket approach, I would make a different suggestion. For example, I would not have whittled down fire, for example. It would have been the full boat, if we were looking at it from a bucket perspective. But trying to look at it, trying to get to an aggregate number and say one bucket, one shot with the voters. Here's what I think is our best shot, best, bam. Here's what here's us agreeing to whittle it down before we submit it to the voters. Here's my suggestion what one bucket looks like. So just FYI, the list I was submitting was kind of for one bucket. One second, Mike, sorry, Councilman Morthland, I think I have you, and I'll come back to you. Yes, sir.
Two questions, one for Chief and then one for the finance guys over here. Real quick, can you just give us a very, very brief definition of the new public safety facility headquarters? What is going to be in there? Is that including a fire? Is that just police?
So yes, it would include everybody that's currently in the current police facility, which includes our property and evidence room, our motor barn, and we would have space for the fire department for their command staff. And I think, one, we need to be co-located so we can better operate together, but it would include the command staff from the fire department, which I believe, Joe, is less than 20 employees once you go full-time? Correct.
So this is a true public safety center. It's
Correct.
not just
Police, fire, and with this inclusion of 911, it would have all three entities.
We were talking about funding the bond, and it is through the millage rate. Millage rate is taxes. Everybody's property taxes are going higher. Let's look at it in a different perspective. Let's say we hit quite a downturn in property values. What does that do to us as the city? Are we on the hook at that point and make up the difference because we've approved this bond number and we're making payments on this bond number, but property values have fallen all of a sudden, significantly fallen? Can you address that?
Yeah, so we would, the city would be responsible for making it up either through other revenues, or we would have to increase the millage rate to make up whatever difference. If property values went down, whatever means the city had to be able to cover that debt, the city would have to employ.
Yeah, you're pledging your full faith, credit, and taxing power, so with the general obligation bonds, and so if it went down, you would need to increase your debt service millage accordingly. And so these estimates that we've run are based on estimated interest rates. The inverse is true as well. If our interest rates are lower, or if your mills, your value was growing at a faster pace, you could potentially have a lower millage impact as well, or that could go down over time.
Will, can I address that too? And Ryan, I want you to weigh in on this because I think that's a fantastic question. It's a question most people would have. I would submit to you, because of the economic policies that this council has begun to institute with a long 20-year vision and longer in place, is that the economic values in this city will continue to appreciate at a greater value than your neighboring sisters and then the neighboring area. That's not to say there couldn't be a downturn. The second part of that equation is, remember, assessment values move at 3% up, aggregate, top, right? So even if you had a significant downturn, and I'm again suggesting to you that Roswell will still be in the upper tier of property values in relation to all its neighbors, even if you had an economic downturn of substance, that remember the values come down low just like they move up low based upon the percentages. So you're not going to have as big a swing, particularly over even a 5-year period, as you might think in terms of income vis-a-vis property values. It sounds like, hey, my house was worth $400. By the way, this is based on $450,000 home model today. That's what the model is. The model is basically that our resident is paying, after $450,000 home, is paying in taxes today to the city of Roswell, not Fulton County, is paying $849.24. Under the suggestion, and this is what I was hoping to get to, because I kind of threw $160 million at you, I am hoping that you will get to basically a $140 million number. I'm hoping that you'll get to a one bucket $140 million number, which would mean a 1.5 mil increase if the voters approved it. That would mean that if I had a $450,000 home based upon current property taxes, that the tax increase to me as a resident of Roswell on a $450,000 home on a 30-year schedule, that my taxes would go up $270 a year. So if I'm paying $849 now, if the voters passed a $140 million bond in November on a 30-year schedule, their increase in their property taxes would be basically $252, or going from $849 a year to $1,101 a year. And so you ask a great question, what happens if home values go down dramatically? Real world, looking long-term ahead, you're in that business, smart question. And I will suggest to you again, two things. You're putting in policies that are going to appreciate both residential and commercial property values in the city of Roswell greater than your sister cities and much greater than the national averages. And that's going to show up. The second part is, remember, they're only going up at 3% a year. So conversely, they're not going to drop this way that you might think, commensurate to what property values grow. So in other words, the digest will still require a certain level of income, if that makes sense. So, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to dominate the floor, and I apologize. Councilmember Palermo. Mike, can I ask Dan real quick, just to explain the $20 million on bike? Can you do the bike and pedestrian master plan? Dan, can you throw $20 million? Can you explain that? Can we get it done for $20 million?
Getting it done is probably a question that I'm not in the best position to answer, but we can do a tremendous amount towards completion of the bike ped master plan. I don't have the bottom line on that to complete in its entirety. I'm not sure we've estimated the entire plan, nor would I be as comfortable giving you a yes answer on that with the inflation that we've seen in the construction market over the last just year and a half or two. And so I apologize, but that's a big dent in our bike ped master plan. And the other complication is we do have a lot that is going in via the T-SPLOS program.
Yep.
So I'm a little challenged in separating out that next pie slice for you, sir.
Reason I'm asking, because I'm just thinking like a voter, right? And you're saying, hey, you're giving me a bond, and you're going to give me $25 million for police and $15 million for fire and $20 million for my bike and pedestrian master plan. Doggone it, I want to see my paths look a lot better. I want to see my trails look a lot better. I want to see a dramatic improvement if I'm going to give you $20 million.
I'm absolutely sure there would be a dramatic improvement that people would notice around the city with a $20 million infusion to the bike ped master plan.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you. Councilmember Palermo, yes, sir. Sorry.
So, two things. One, yeah, related to the bike ped master plan, I do think it is important that we're putting money towards both the bike ped master plan and sidewalk gaps in general, because we certainly do have some major sidewalk gaps that are certainly impacting a lot of residents. We get a lot of requests on, et cetera, that are not a part of the bike ped master plan. And so I do think we should have money towards sidewalks, which would be covering bike ped master plan contributions as well as sidewalk gaps. And with that, I want to actually go back to Peter's comment or question earlier regarding the buckets. So I do strongly feel there should be some separate buckets. Again, not 10 different buckets, not 6 different buckets. I think it has to be a reasonable amount for voters to look at and consume. But I do have concerns with the potential of residents loving some things and perhaps even really just being against some things. And I don't want them to feel forced to either vote for because of the thing they love or vote against because of the thing that they don't love. And so what I'd like to just bring up to answer Councilman Vanstrom's question or comment was, he had mentioned really just the parks being together instead of a 24.7 and a 57.4, something along the lines of just a parks bucket for 82 million. And then a couple different proposals or suggestions, and not sure what makes the most sense. But one thing that I was looking at is potentially a public safety headquarters or complex, and just that being a bucket, but going higher than the 20 or 25 million, and maybe going up to a not to exceed 30 million or something like
Mike,
that.
82.6 okay on parks, by the way? Just the real number. Is that
Okay,
82.6?
I apologize, I did the wrong math.
No,
then.
no,
For
no
sure.
worries. I just
So
wanted to
well, for the sake of argument, $83 million
Okay.
for parks, for PD. Again, I have major concerns with underestimating, and obviously, you know, who knows what the supply chain, labor, all those different things look like. I'd much rather ask for a slightly bigger one and then be able to actually not take that full amount. So something along the lines of a not to exceed 30 or 35, whatever the safe estimate is. And then this one, I'm unsure of two different ways. One way, one bucket is putting fire station and parking deck together as one bucket. And the reason is those can be related with saving property costs, et cetera. And then here's the question where I'm kind of torn on. One way to do it would just be that sidewalks is a fourth separate bucket. The irony is, the part of me that likes the idea of combining it with the fire station and the parking deck is because, as Councilman Vanstrom brought up before, we don't know the exact costs of the parking deck, how many spots we can fit, all different things like that. The reason I like the idea of considering putting sidewalks in there is just basically having all the excess then go to sidewalks, meaning we're gonna do 3 fire stations, we're gonna do a parking deck, and any leftover is gonna go to sidewalks, because in this, I've got $20 million towards parking deck and $20 million towards sidewalks. If hypothetically, the voters decide yes on this and they want a parking deck, and it turns out it costs $25 million for us to maximize the effectiveness of it, then that just means we no longer have $20 million left for sidewalks, we have $15 million, but at least the public knows that commitment, that we're going over and absolutely expecting a good portion will be going to sidewalks. So that's just a suggestion to throw out, if it should be separate or if it should be kept in to kind of make up for the uncertainty of the parking deck. Because again, I do not want to underestimate what any of the costs are and then tell residents we can't build it.
Mike is a great point. Can I just make a clarification, is that one of the things we haven't really talked about, honestly, the amount of department infighting will grow dramatically if you actually get a revenue bond approved for 140 or 150 or 160 or 100, whatever you approve it for, right? And you have it under 4 or 5 categories, because if you remember, you said I'm outlining these general pieces, but they can steal from one another, ostensibly.
Right.
All right, they can. And then you will see that, like, hey, dude, I got $54 million and you got 16. And you could, I'm telling you, it will create a little tension here in a way that they're not accustomed to fight for these projects. Buckets do make sense, but if you notice, that's why I am trying to identify, like, hey, let's give some clear lines of target here. Like, and I'm with you, because to your point, if fire is going to run underneath a bucket, I would say, then fire should be $29 million, right? Am I saying that right? Yeah, fire should be $29 million. I would say that.
So with that, 2 things. One, I think absolutely if it's all one item, there's gonna be that infighting and costs go up, et cetera. And I actually feel that's what a lot of taxpayers don't want, where there might be a lot of taxpayers that really are, hey, I support $83 million for the parks, but I don't support XYZ other thing, and they don't want to see any of that money going over. And I think we should be creating something where maybe they select all 4 buckets, maybe they expect, support 0, and something in between. But then also, though, I guess my hesitation with the comment of the, then if, let's say we were to do a bucket that was fire station and parking deck and maybe sidewalks, you're saying then it's 29. That's where I think there would be potentially a lot of voters that are saying, hey, we need some improvement, I want to spend some money, but in yet 3 years suspended, I'm not looking to take that big of an increase and have that much increase over that.
You're
That's my
going
thought process.
exactly where I hoped you would go finally in this discussion. The reason I'm submitting one bucket and the reason I'm submitting us to make the decisions to submit to the voters is to create that discipline to ultimately take the decision of making away from folks having to fight. I'm trying to focus some discipline on us to say, you know what? We're going to spend $20 million on a parking deck, right? We're going to spend $20 million on the bike and pedestrian main plan. We're going to submit to the voters to approve that. That means we're going to spend $20 million on the bike and pedestrian master plan. If we submit, can you go back up for me, Ryan? If we say that we're going to spend $57.9 on parks, that's what we're going to spend, or less. right? We're not gonna spend more than 57.9. We're gonna spend 57.9, and we're gonna be highly accountable for that. I think, to your point, that's why I wanted to get out of the buckets. If you'll forgive me, I think buckets give you a little more generosity, right? It's easier to say the buckets get larger. In other words, that's why there's $213 million of submissions plus another 20 plus another 20, because it's easier to ask. I think it's forcing a little more discipline and a little more scrutiny on the dollars, actually making it one bucket and forcing us to make the decisions rather than saying, because Joe can legitimately say, I need $29 million. That's not an illegitimate request. It's not, right? But us forcing the decision to say, Joe, we're going to submit to the voters that you need $15 million.
See, the problem is, I think either way, this mayor and council would certainly be strict and hold to all those different aspects. I also think it is our responsibility to make sure that each request is as small as possible. And that's why, even though the 29 million requested by fire is completely legitimate, I think 15 million is more reasonable and a compromise with our big focus on public safety and also fiscal responsibility and keeping costs low for residents. The reason I see the importance of bucket is not related to that part. It's the last thing I want to do is have something a resident absolutely wants and loves and says, but you're only going to get it if you're willing to pay an enormous amount for something that you don't want. And I think there would be a number of residents that potentially say, it's too bad, I really wanted XYZ on here, but I'm not willing to pay for ABC, and I don't like that I wasn't given the choice, so now I'm just gonna have to go without it.
Can you be more specific than XYZ and
So-
ABC? Because I think,
so
let's talk real world.
Yeah, so I think it's completely potential that you've got someone that says, we need to have the best parks, we don't have the best parks. I will gladly support a bond that includes 83 million to parks. But I've read the parking study, and I enjoy parking at City Hall. The flashing light makes it easier. There's no way on earth I support the city having a parking deck. Vice versa, I think there's some people that are just different places, time in their lives. They're they're saying, you know what, our parks, I like to walk once a day, and I have a great walk, through the park. And what I really care about is it should be easier for my spouse and I to go to Canton Street. And so basically we're saying, look, you love the parks, we put it all together, only if you pay for X, Y, Z. And it can be the same thing with the other things, sidewalks. We've got, we've seen some even emails recently on some places where they're on the matrix, but they're low on the matrix. They were very clear that is their number one priority. And they have not been asking or saying and emailing in, talking about the parks and things like that. So that's why I feel this mayor and council will be completely responsible in managing staff. Mr. Knighton will give them complete discipline, making sure they understand. And I still think it's our responsibility to have as low numbers as possible and somewhat breaking out to make sure that we're truly giving our voters a choice and not just telling them, hey, all or none. Go ahead and decide. That's my reasoning for the buckets.
Councilmember Hall, sorry.
This is a great conversation. Just want to weigh in. I tend to be inclined with Mayor Wilson's one price kind of option. And the reason is all of these things make up our city, and all of these things are in big need. I mean, they wouldn't be asking. We wouldn't be here having this discussion. And when I was campaigning and during recent campaigns, residents just unsolicited would say, I'm willing to pay more in taxes. Why don't you do something to improve our city? I'm willing to pay a couple $100 more a year. So they're talking about all the city, not just sections of the city. So that's my position. I also think that we'll have more flexibility, as far as movement of the funds. And the funds will be identified to go to these specific targets, safety, fire, police, parks. So that's my position.
Councilmember Hall, that's why you're much wiser than Mike Palermo. Let's just be clear about it. I think Lee had her hand up first. Sorry, Councilmember Mortland.
This question is for the attorney. When you guys write the bonds and put them together, do you have a majority of placements where you do have the bucket answers, or do you all go in as one ask?
It's typically one ask.
It's
And
typically
that's
one ask.
mainly because most geo bonds have a sales tax component as well. And so sales tax question has all the different buckets. And so they're combined. So majority of geo bonds in Georgia are done that way. But the ones we do straight geos, just one question is what we do. It's one, unless it's something very unique, like a certain project that probably, like a ballpark or something that's very, changing for the city, then we separate that. But for general governmental purposes, we typically combine them all in one question and one bond to cover all those categories.
And last follow-up to that is probability of passage. Do you see when we put things together, when you guys put things together, a higher probability of getting these things done with clear and concise spending, future spendings?
That's a harder question because most of mine are all combined, so I'm not sure what alternative was. But if you vote several questions, by the third or fourth of them, you might say, well, that's enough or something like that. And so but that's not a legal question. That's just, something I've seen.
I think Councilmember Vanstrom was next. Okay, Councilmember Hills.
Thank you. Councilmember Palermo, thank you. You are exactly right that our residents do want a choice and they do want to weigh in. I do differ from your opinion on bucket versus one-stop shop. I agree with Councilmember Hall. I too have been approached by people willing to open their wallet immediately. Before I ran for office, talking about it in neighborhoods when I did, and even since I've been in office. I am currently actively involved in conversations about multiple parks right now, multiple fire and police conversations about sidewalks, 2 hot ones right now. So I believe that we can and will be great ambassadors of our residents' money. I think it is exhausting to go through and read all the extra things that show up on a ballot. That doesn't mean we don't have uninformed or unintelligent residents voting, but I think that they're entrusting us, who are actually answering the phones and answering emails and showing up at meetings, to take care of their needs in a responsible way, and I think we can do that, especially with another meeting tomorrow night to discuss that, and then receive emails to mayor and council. I can't tell you the name of the email right this second, but can get to us. And then, of course, we would have, I'm assuming, confirm this for me, some public comment opportunities on July 11th to answer any further questions that we hadn't had an opportunity to field. So I feel like a one-stop shop with plenty of delineation that I know will communicate out well to our residents between now and then, based on what we decide to put forth. I agree. Respectfully, I certainly understand where you're coming from, Palermo, but I believe a one vote for everything is important. And we have liaisons and crossover with our liaisons with our departments to help oversee that. I can't imagine having infighting within our staff, so and I don't want to see that. So thank you.
Councilmember Vanstrom.
Yeah, thank you, and I just want to make Dan have to get up one more time.
Thank you, sir.
The feedback I'm already receiving a lot from residents is doesn't T-Splosh cover this? Isn't T-Splosh taking care of this? Why do we have T-Splosh? Why do we need more money on top of T-Splosh? So what I would like to challenge you to do is clarify those things we were just discussing. And if you're talking about the bike master plan, how much more outside of specifically what T-Splosh is going to be doing for us in that category? Do we need to complete things that we need to complete so that we can go to our voters and say, yes, to answer your question, T-Splosh is going to be doing this, but it falls way short of all of the other things. So if we could maybe be a little more specific, that'd be really, really helpful. Secondly, my understanding, there's not much on T-Splosh at all that has to do with recreation and parks in this city. And I think clarity there is really important too, because The ask for our parks is that we recreate five-star parks. We haven't won a national award in a few years for our parks that we used to win award after award after award. I want to get back to that. And I know our residents want to get back to that, but they want clarification that other funds are just not there and T-Splosh is not there. And I believe that is the case. So, yeah, well, since you came up here, you could say.
First, shout out to Dave Cox, who answered a question between the last question and this question that answers this question.
I don't
So
think Dave is allowed to speak this evening. I saw him walking in, and
That's
he
why
said he was
he-
not going to come tonight, so coming tomorrow, so he's off the table.
That's why I'm the backup guy. So specifically to the T-Splosh question and bike ped input, the entire funding for T-Splosh 2, which is roughly 80 million, let's say in total, includes roughly 20 million of multi-use trails and related bike ped related improvements. So roughly 25% of that, and that's over a 5-year period. So there's this healthy chunk. And to your point, that puts a little bit into perspective the additional 20 million that you're talking about potentially. That is a sizable chunk. The entire bike ped plan is in triple digits, millions. So this puts a very substantial, or takes a substantial bite out of our bike ped mobility in the city of Roswell. It doubles
200,
125 roughly, I believe, 150, somewhere in that ballpark, over a 25 or 30-year period. So this was 5-year increments of about $30 million that we were roughly budgeting around, or estimating. So 20 million in T-Splosh, another 20 million if you put it in the bond, and that's a pretty good progress.
Councilmember Palermo. I'm sorry, Peter, were you done? Sorry.
Well, I'll get it back. Go ahead. No.
I don't have a specific question.
Excellent. So, two things, and this is I think such a healthy discussion to be having. So one, just want to be clear as well that this is a good example where 20 million, if that ends up being an amount that's chosen, and if the voters selected it, it wouldn't take on the full bike ped master plan, but would make significant improvement. Just as from a sidewalk gap standpoint, I want to say the sidewalk gaps, if we were to fill them all in, last I heard, and that was probably before the increase in costs, it was about $50 million. So when you hear a resident come in and talk about a sidewalk gap, they should know that the sidewalk gap is already on the matrix. So there's already, it's already been ranked by staff around safety, location, all these different aspects. And so it's a lot of money. And I certainly hear from many residents, they want to see these gaps filled in. They want to see the bike ped master plan. And at the same time, I think we have to be diligent in just really deciding what that appropriate number and budget is. But now moving on to the bigger question at hand regarding where I stand with one question versus three buckets, 4 buckets, whatever. Here's the beauty with the comment opportunities we'll have from the public. I'm really just focused on what the residents want. So if we're hearing between now and July 11th that they don't care, they're just happy we're doing these things and really excited to see it overall, then clearly on July 11th my vote is of course being fine with one question. If I'm hearing, disagreement or wanting more of just to be able to have that choice, and that's the feedback that I get or I hear at those different public meetings that occur on on July 4th, I think we'll know what people will be wanting to talk about when they stop by the stage, when we'll say hello to everybody, or while we're just watching the fireworks. We know what the big topic will be, which is great. I look forward to hearing residents, and frankly, whether it's at committee tomorrow night or the July 11th council meeting, then I think that's what's gonna sway my piece. Based on comments that I've heard over the years, I think there's a preference from residents to have the different buckets. But again, I'm completely fine and happy to be wrong on that, and they just say, hey, we just want to see you make this investment. In which case, great, we're here for the residents, and again, I think a bond shows that, because ultimately, not only do they get to have influence on how we set it up on July 11th, if this mayor and council chooses to do that, but also they get to say in November to decide if the city goes through with it or not.
Councilmember Venture.
All right, and just because I did bring up buckets, I brought up buckets because I knew it was something that needed to be discussed, and that it's something that we do need to come to an agreement on. And just my approach to a bond referendum is keeping it as simple as possible for the voters. We're going to be in the middle of a very busy election in November, and I am in favor of keeping this as a one bond referendum, making sure that as we progress through the process with the public, we understand more specifically, is this a number you're comfortable with Parks and Recs? Is this a number you're comfortable with sidewalks? Is this a number? And I have to be honest, just hearing Dan and his report on those numbers that's staggering.
Mm-hmm.
That is a staggering number, 150 to 125 million that we need for the bike ped. That's never going to happen unless we take a step forward. And I think this is wonderful that this council is being courageous. And I'm behind it 100% to bring this to the public.
I just want to echo the thoughts of my colleagues, and it's funny, and by the way, buckets are incredibly tempting to me, because there's a part of me that would love to go to our fellow residents and say, for example, I need would you vote on $175 million on the bike and pedestrian plan and the sidewalk gap plan? Because if you approve $175 million, I can fulfill both of those plans, right? And by the way, I need $90 million, and if I took it out of a bucket, because Jeff got leaned on a little bit on this process, so he actually came in a little low. And so Jeff said, I need $100 million. It's not made up money. It's not funny money. Like, it's like really like to do what we want to do and to do what our hopes and visions are as a city and as residents. And I think as a resident, you came to me and said, yeah. But then the practical part of, I think the responsible part of us as leaders is putting those pieces together to make it digestible as quickly and easily as possible. Because we know we would all like to spend $125 million on the bike and pedestrian plan. We would all like to spend $50 million on the sidewalk gap plan. We would. But we also know that's probably not practical in the next 36 months to do that. And so to the point that you just made, Peter, is $20 million is a significant investment in beginning to change the landscape of saying we're serious about this, and the visible nature of this will change to our city, and it will change to the investment community, because it will again show up. And I think that's an important marker. So I'm very sympathetic to the buckets. It makes a lot of sense. It's very, very logical. Very, very logical. And Mike, I share, like, part of me is like, well, we might get one, but we might lose the other, right? But it's better than getting nothing. And the reason that we are advancing this as the elected leadership of the city is because it's way overdue. It's way overdue to make this recommendation to our fellow residents to say, it's time for us to invest in our parks in a significant way. Not in the general fund. Yes, we're going to do that in the general fund, and we did it in our budget this year. But we've got to make real investments in a way that we haven't done in the past. We've got to make real investments in our fire. We have to make real investments in our police. And it goes beyond the general fund. And ultimately, the voters will make that decision. But I think part of this process is us trying to pare it down, digest it as hard as we can, and say, here's our recommendations. And I guess I got a question. So if this goes committee tomorrow, same kind of discussion takes place tomorrow, and then we end up voting on something?
You certainly can have as healthy of a discussion as you've had tonight. If there is some level of understanding and or consensus, you can just simply move it forward to the July 11th meeting. But certainly you can have as detailed and as robust a discussion as you would like to have regarding the matter, and continue to refine your thoughts on a potential bond issuance.
Do we need to make a motion to move it to committee, or can we just put it on committee?
I think a motion would be in order.
From a work session? No.
No.
So tomorrow, before
before.
the committee will have to vote
that's right.
to add it to the agenda.
Right.
Okay, so we'll do it at committee tomorrow.
Once we open the committee.
My
correct.
apologies.
That is correct, no.
So it's 8 till 7 o'clock. So we have a city council meeting, I guess, in 8 minutes. Ryan, I know that you could expound for hours, and we couldn't stop you talking, and we have to hold you back, brother. I can't thank you enough, Jim and David, for being with us. Thank you. Thank you, council, for your and staff for everybody's input. And I guess with in being conscious of time, so in the city council workshop on the budget proposed bond projects. Thanks so much for being here. We don't need a motion to close this out, do we?